1945, Japan. Midnight. 8 American sailors paddle ashore in total darkness. They don't attack a base, they rig a railroad. 90 seconds later, a speeding cruiser puts 55 pounds of explosive. The only time a submarine ever destroyed a train. At 0700 hours on July 19, 1945, Commander Eugene Fluckey pressed his eye to the periscope of USS Barb. Below him, a Japanese supply train crawled along the Karafuto coastline, carrying troops and ammunition that would soon be used against American soldiers, unless he stopped it. Fluckey was 31 years old. This was his 5th war patrol as Barb's commanding officer. 17 enemy ships already lay on the ocean floor because of him. The Japanese were running 6 trains a day along this coastal railroad. Each carried between 40 and 60 soldiers, plus ammunition and supplies for the garrison at Kashiho. For 3 weeks, Barb had been hunting in the Sea of Okhotsk, watching these lifelines move unchallenged. USS Barb was a Gado-class submarine, 2,400 tons submerged, crew of 80 men. One of the most decorated submarines in the Pacific Fleet, for Presidential Unit citations, 8 battle stars, and a Navy unit commendation. But what made Barb truly dangerous wasn't her awards. It was her captain. 3 months earlier, Eugene Fluckey had been awarded the Medal of Honor for an attack on Namquan Harbor off the coast of China in January 1945. He had taken Barb into waters so shallow the submarine couldn't dive. Minefields lined both sides. Japanese destroyers guarded the entrance. Inside the harbor, 30 merchant ships sat at anchor, protected by what the Japanese believed was an impenetrable defensive position. Fluckey attacked anyway. 6 torpedoes slammed into the convoy. Then 4 more. Then Barb made a high-speed surface run through uncharted waters as depth charges detonated all around her. 8 ships sunk. 0 American casualties. Pearl Harbor called it the most audacious submarine attack of the war. But Fluckey wasn't finished. By June 1945, Japanese merchant shipping had nearly vanished from the Pacific. American submarines were running out of targets. Before Barb's 12th and final war patrol, Fluckey approached Navy Research and Development with an unusual request. He wanted rockets. The Mark 51 launcher carried 12 5-inch spin-stabilized rockets, each tipped with 10 pounds of high explosive, with a range of 3 miles. The Navy was testing the system as an anti-kamikaze weapon for landing ships. Fluckey convinced them to bolt one onto Barb's forward deck. That made USS Barb the only rocket-launching submarine in the U.S. Navy. She departed midway on June 8, loaded with 72 rockets and orders to raise hell along the Japanese coast. On June 22 at 0230 hours, Fluckey surfaced 3 miles off the town of Sherry, population 20,000, home to factories producing supplies for the Japanese military. Barb turned broadside to shore. Fluckey gave the order. 12 rockets ripple-fired in 5 seconds, screaming through the darkness and slamming into Sherry's industrial district. Fires erupted along the waterfront. Barb submerged and vanished before the Japanese could respond. It was the first time in history a submarine had launched rockets at a shore target. Over the next 3 weeks, Barb fired 60 more rockets at factory towns along the Hokkaido and Karafuto coasts, Shikuka, Kashiho, Shiratori. Japan's largest paper mill destroyed. A leather factory producing pilot uniforms burned to the ground. Shipyards reduced to twisted wreckage. Fluckey also used Barb's 4-inch deck gun to shell military installations. The submarine operated with near-total impunity. By mid-July, Japanese reconnaissance aircraft were actively hunting her, but Fluckey kept moving, kept striking, kept the enemy off balance. Then, on July 19, Fluckey noticed something through the periscope. A railroad ran less than 400 yards from the shoreline. Trains moved north and south day and night. Locomotives hauling freight cars packed with troops and military cargo. This was a supply artery feeding Japanese forces preparing to resist an American invasion. Fluckey watched the trains for 3 days. He counted schedules, studied terrain, The beach was accessible. The tracks were exposed. And an idea began to form. Shelling the railroad would only damage the tracks. The Japanese would repair them within hours. Flucky wanted to destroy a moving train, maximum damage, maximum disruption, maximum psychological impact. But submarines weren't designed for land warfare. Torpedoes were useless. Rockets lacked precision. The deck gun couldn't track a moving train through coastal terrain. Flucky needed something different. Something the Japanese would never expect. Something no submarine had ever done before. He carefully covered the device with dirt and gravel, smoothing the surface until it blended perfectly with the surrounding ballast. No visible disturbance. A track inspector in daylight might have noticed the slightly shifted stones, but a locomotive engineer racing through the darkness would see nothing at all. The shore party withdrew from the embankment and began to return to the beach, retracing their route in reverse, across the road, through the drainage ditch, and into the tall grass. They moved faster now. The mission was complete. The explosive was armed. Every second spent on Japanese soil increased the risk of discovery. At 0145, they reached the beach where Newland and Richard waited with the rafts. All 8 men dragged the boats to the waterline and climbed aboard. Saunders checked the luminous dial of his watch. They had been ashore exactly 1 hour and 40 minutes. USS Barb would already be preparing to dive. The rafts pushed off and began paddling toward the submarine's position, 950 yards offshore. In calm water, with experienced paddlers, it should have taken about 15 minutes. They were halfway there when Flucky's voice cut through the darkness. He was shouting through a megaphone from Barb's conning tower. "Paddle faster." Another train was coming. Through the periscope, Flucky had spotted it approaching from the north. The headlight was off, but its exhaust plume was visible against the mountains. The locomotive was heading directly toward the section of track where Hatfield had buried the charge. The timing was dangerously close. The men drove their paddles into the water with desperate rhythm. The rafts were still 400 yards from Barb. The submarine sat impossibly low in the water, her hull barely visible. Flucky had moved her closer to shore, within 600 yards, to shorten the paddle back, but that placed Barb in water so shallow she would scrape bottom if forced to dive. Every non-essential crewman aboard the submarine was on deck, watching the shoreline and the approaching train. 300 yards. 200. The sound of the locomotive grew louder. The men in the rafts could now make out its dark silhouette. It was moving fast, 40, maybe 45 miles per hour, pushing hard through the straight, level coastal stretch. The train was less than 90 seconds from the explosive. Flucky faced an impossible choice. If he waited for the men to come aboard before diving, Barb might still be on the surface when Japanese response forces arrived. Coastal artillery could open fire. Patrol boats could converge. If he submerged now, the 8 men would be abandoned, trapped on the surface with no escape. Flucky made his decision. He ordered Barb to turn and prepare for an emergency dive, but he would wait. The shore party had earned that much. At 0146, the rafts reached Barb. The men scrambled up the hull and through the deck hatches. Saunders was the last aboard. The rubber rafts were cut loose and left drifting, no time to retrieve them. Flucky sealed the hatches. Diesel engines roared to life. Barb turned hard for deeper water. At 0147 on July 23, 1945, the northbound train reached the buried device. 68 tons of steel passed over the rail. The rail depressed. The microswitch closed. 55 pounds of high explosive detonated directly beneath the locomotive's boiler. The explosion was visible from Barb. A massive fireball erupted along the embankment. The boiler ruptured instantly, adding superheated steam to the blast. Metal fragments shot skyward in a fountain of flame. Sections of the locomotive were hurled hundreds of feet into the air. The engine disintegrated. The boiler split apart. Drive wheels tore free. The cabin smokestack cartwheeled down the embankment toward the sea. The freight cars had no chance. The first slammed into the wreckage at full speed. The second climbed over it and shattered. The third jackknifed it and rolled off the embankment. Cars 4 through 16 piled into a twisted mass of steel and splintered wood. The sound reached Barb as rolling thunder, echoing off the coastal mountains. Fires spread through the wreckage. Ammunition in several cars began to cook off, triggering secondary explosions. Flucky ordered all non-essential crewmen topside. Dozens of submariners crowded the deck and conning tower, watching the fires burn along the Karafuto coastline. Japanese propaganda would later claim the train carried civilians. American intelligence said otherwise. Trains running at night on coastal military railways carried troops and war supplies. Barb surged toward deeper water. Within minutes, Flucky ordered the dive. Searchlights swept the surface behind them, but Barb slipped beneath the sea and vanished. The submarine remained submerged for 6 hours as Japanese forces searched in vain. At dawn, smoke still rose from the shattered railway. USS Barb resumed her patrol. And over the next 3 days, she kept attacking. By the time Barb returned to Midway, her battle flag told an unmatched story: ships sunk, rockets fired, shore targets destroyed. And at the bottom of that flag, a single symbol no other submarine would ever display: a locomotive. USS Barb remains the only submarine in history to sink a train.